Welcome to Insight, a podcast of Caribou Road Christian Fellowship created by youth and young adults for youth and young adults. Join us as we seek insight from the generations of our church as they share inside their faith and lives.
Hey, welcome everyone to the podcast today. We're so glad to be with you. My name's Michael. I'm the Youth and Young Adults Minister here at CRCF. And we have a few guests. We have Andrik and Lisa, Emilie-Rose, and Rochelle. So how about you guys go around and share how you're connected to the church and also what your favorite comfort food is. We're going to start with Rochelle.
Hi, I'm Rochelle. I go to CRCF youth group. I also watch the kids ministry sometimes. My comfort food is iced coffee, and I really like fruit. Like any sort of fruit, I just like. So good. Yeah.
Awesome. How about you, Emily?
Yeah, so I'm Emilie-Rose, and basically I am a youth leader. I am a young adult, and I run the CRCF Youth Instagram. My comfort food is honestly probably like the classic, like meat, mashed potatoes, vegetables, but my inner Italian also really wants to say pasta. So, yeah.
So we're Andrik and Lisa Moe, and we're very active in the church. You may have seen us in front of the Red Fridge. We're also involved in co-hosting a life group in the Surrey Langley area, and I'm also on the church board. And as far as a comfort food, I don't know, put a good plate of nachos in front of us, and that'll do us well. Yeah.
Nachos and guacamole, that's so good. I think my comfort food would be like really strong coffee and really dark chocolate. Yeah, not quite as healthy as fruit, unfortunately. But yeah, so the podcast today, we're actually talking about spiritual dry seasons in our life, because oftentimes you have those times where you're like, oh man, I feel so close to Jesus, and you can feel him in your life and things are awesome. But then there's times where you can feel really distant and you kind of go, is God even present? And is he around? What's going on? And that can be pretty disorienting, especially I remember in my teenage years, particularly, that this was something that would happen, because like you go to a camp or you go on a missions trip and you just have this experience where you like can see God working. And then as you step out of that, you go home and you suddenly go, was God only at camp, or is God only where I was serving? But we want to kind of come together and just get some different perspectives and experiences with that, as we have a lot of different ages and a lot of different lives that we can hear from. So I wanted to ask you guys today, have you ever had like a spiritual like mountaintop experience where you feel really close to God?
I think that sometimes, like you were saying, when you go to certain, conferences or events or things like that, when you're devoting all this time into prayer and worship and with, a group of believers, then when you come out of that, sometimes it can be a little bit, after a few days, oh, you're just this something's missing. Like, oh, was that just temporary? But it's not. And, it's just a different experience, right? We have different experiences with the Lord. And it doesn't mean that if all that, hyperness is not there, that it's, that God is not there.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like we're so used to being in this routine of life that when we go to those kind of places, we get so used to just spending time with God constantly. And it's like that starts becoming a routine for us. And it's like, oh, like, this is so amazing. Like, I don't want to leave. Like, I feel so connected with God. But then once you do, you're like, oh, great. Now we're.
What are some of the thoughts and feelings that like go through your head when you like have that kind of shock almost going back to normal life?
It's really, I feel like it's very sad, because like you're living your best life with God, and you're taking a big walk with him, and you're kind of letting him follow, like you're following him, you're not taking him with you, and then once that hits you, you're like, oh, great, now I got to do things my way. But it's like, no, it's not like that at all. we should constantly let God follow God, not take him with us.
I feel like it's almost like when you go to like a camp or a conference, you're experiencing like what God is without distraction, if that makes sense. So like for me, like going to camp, like you don't have your phone, you don't have your routine, like you're following a new routine, and it's just spending a lot more time with God because you don't have time to give in to those distractions you would have in your routine at home. So yeah, I feel like you really just experience who God is fully without those distractions. But then when you get thrown back into reality, or when you go back home, you're back into your routine, and you're falling back into those distractions and stuff like that. But it's not that God's leaving. It's just that you're getting distracted from God.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a constant reminder of how life is a distraction. God is always there. And when we put everything aside and put our distractions aside, God just comes that much closer. We allow him basically to do more in our life. But when we go back into our routines, like you were saying, it is easy for us to just be distracted. And God hasn't changed in any of that. But it's just a reminder that we allow distractions to kind of allow him to move him away from us.
Yeah, it's about being intentional, right? We have to be intentional in prayer and worship and Bible study and all of these things, right? It takes some effort on our part.
Think about like when you've had distractions come up and really pull you away from being with God. How have you tried to approach fixing that? And maybe some approaches have worked, and maybe some haven't. What have been some of your experiences with addressing the distractions pulling you away from God?
I think what we've really learned, or I've learned, is that you really have to be disciplined to create good habits, but also create boundaries. Know what boundaries are important in your life. And that has been one of the biggest keys. I think we all know that we need to develop habits, and I would definitely agree that has been a huge key into having a more consistent walk with God. But the other one is boundaries. And we learned very early on that we needed to set boundaries within our marriage, but then over more time, really realized that we needed to create boundaries also within our spiritual life. So what that kind of means is, what am I going to allow myself to get exposed to? How much time am I going to spend on social media? Am I going to set a limit to that? What kind of movies am I going to allow myself to see? Even when sort of the crowd wants to go and see the latest flick, is that really line up with the boundaries that I've set for myself, and to be comfortable to say, no, that doesn't line up. Not to shame anybody else, but it just doesn't line up with the boundaries for myself that I've set. And the same thing goes with the music that I choose to listen to. And everyone has to set their own boundaries and find out what's comfortable for them. But by having those boundaries, it has really allowed me to stay more on track than I would otherwise.
Going back in your life to when you were a youth and a young adult, if you could like set a boundary that you didn't have for yourself, or maybe there was a boundary that you did have for yourself that you really are thankful you had, what would some of those have been?
Well, first of all, I didn't develop a close relationship with the Lord until I was in my upper 20s.
Okay.
So I did know God in my youth, but I would say I blocked him out. And so, yeah, I did not have those boundaries and looking back, I so wish that I had. It would have saved so much grief and trouble. So yeah, I really wish that I had known better and to not allow myself to follow what I would call, my flesh.
Yeah, what's that like for the rest of you guys, just facing distractions and addressing them?
Well, obviously being in high school, it's really hard because there's so much that's going on. You just kind of get caught up in it all. But I think like having time, like make a little, like, cause it's possible. Like there's always enough time to talk to God and like pray to him and stuff. And I do that every night, at least I try to, because like I said, like school is so it's a big distraction that you just get caught up in the drama, and it's a huge waterfall from there. But yeah, just like setting time to just talk to God is like really, really important for sure. And like you said, like boundaries are so important because like people can influence you easily, and like hearing like pressure is such a big part of society now that it affects a lot of people. So yeah, so setting boundaries is really important as well. For sure.
Are there any particular boundaries in your life that you value right now?
Definitely like listening to people on their opinions. I think because people are very opinionated these days that you have to like stop yourself from saying the wrong thing. But yeah, I try not to hang out with a lot of people at my school since my school is not the healthiest place on earth. But yeah, definitely just being careful who you talk to and what you say to them.
I feel like I'm going to expose myself right now, but I feel like I'm a pretty lazy person. So for me, when I get put into routine, I feel like that makes things more of a, like, oh, I don't want to do it. Like, I have to do it. I feel obligated to do it. But when it's something that I want to do, it is obviously more enjoyable. So I feel like instead of like making it you have to like sit down and read your Bible and stuff like that, I like to see it as more of a like, how do I most feel like the presence of God? Like for me, it's worship music. Like I really enjoy listening to worship music and stuff like that. So if that's the way that you can get out of distraction, then do that. Like it doesn't have to, it's not the same for everyone. Like if you feel like you're in a dry season and you're really distracted, well then why don't you go listen to worship music and spend time with God that way, instead of, oh, you have to read the Bible, you have to read this many chapters, you know what I mean?
I get that. It's really funny because like I'm very routine driven, like that's my personality. So I like have a structure. I'm like, I do this and I do this, like my Bible time, like I have like a checklist. But then my wife is so much the opposite. Like if I suggest having a routine for something, she's like, I don't want to do it. Like I could say, let's have a routine for like her favorite activity. And as soon as I say routine, then suddenly she doesn't want to do it. It just takes all the joy out of it. But that mentality of going, okay, how do I enjoy being with God? What does draw me away from those distractions, and just saying, hey, I'm just going to do that. That's really cool to hear. I think it's really valuable for the people that as soon as they hear routine and habit, they're like, it's the worst. That's awesome. Think about your own lives. Has there been a particular time that you've really had a dry season in your life?
I think for me, one thing I can think of is just an ongoing situation, like a health situation, when, you're praying and you're doing everything you know to do, but nothing's changing and you're still dealing with it. And sometimes these situations can literally go on for years. And after a long period of time like that, it can get very draining and very tiring, and you can enter into a dry season. And so I've experienced that kind of thing for sure.
And for me, it would be probably when I've involved myself far too much into my work and allowed that to become my entire focus without the balance of spiritual focus in there as well.
For me, I have a lot of it, like I have anxiety. So when I get stressed, I start to panic, and then I like freak out a bunch, like because there's so much that's going on. And so, in grade 10, like I was saying before, like I was hanging out with the wrong group of people. My focus kind of started to be around like my friends and like their problems and issues and stuff. So like I kind of took my own problems and like shoved them behind me, and like, more focusing on helping my friends instead of like focusing on myself and like growing my faith in God and stuff. So, and it was like this constant dealing with their problems. And so
I'd say that COVID was probably like the hardest, is the hardest. We're still dealing with it, but I think that's definitely been like one of the hardest dry seasons I've gone through. Not Actually, it's funny because the beginning of COVID is when I have felt actually the closest to God. And that was simply because we didn't have anything to do. So why don't I spend my time reading the Bible and stuff like that? So at the beginning of COVID, I felt really close with God. But then as restrictions started to lift and stuff like that, you were able to go out more and more distractions were able to come in. And yeah, that's when I started to like experience a pretty dry season. But I think it made it more tough because the people around me who were also Christian were also dealing with dry seasons during the same time. So it was like we were all kind of dealing with it, and no one was really there to like be like, hey, like kind of push you, because everyone was like, oh, like in the cycle that was like never ending of just like feeling so far from God. But yeah, I think it was really important to like just engage more in youth and stuff like that. So
yeah, how did that dry season break? Because like oftentimes we like, part of getting out of dry season is having that Christian community around us that is pushing us out of it. But if your whole community is going through the same season together, how did you guys get out of that?
Right. I think a major part was definitely when church went back in person, and even just like youth being back in person and being a leader, and seeing that like the kids were so excited to come back even though that like COVID was still an issue. I think that seeing their fire for God and still seeing God move through the kids and the youth was really encouraging to me to, you know, like turn back to God. Like there's no reason for me to like be so far when he wants to be so close with me. So
I'm just curious, Andrik, when you talked about just like when you get really caught up in work, I know for myself that like I had that with work. I had that with school when I was in school, where I just get really caught up in it and kind of tunnel vision. I was curious how you've kind of stepped out of those dry seasons with that.
Yeah, I think it is finding the right habits and really working on those habits. And so I know for the longest time I had troubles getting into the Word, opening up the Bible. And so Lisa and I developed a partnership, but this could easily be done with a friend or a family member. And we just committed to spending a certain amount of time every single night in the Word. And we said, we're going to read the entire Bible front to back, and we're just going to do it one chunk at a time every night, you know, at least, 15 minutes. And so, we weren't 100% perfect. There were, nights where we were out doing whatever and, okay, we're going to skip tonight. But I would say, a good 95% of the time we committed to doing that. And we did read the Bible front to back. And we actually did it a couple times. So more than one version of the Bible. And it's a habit that we continue to this day. So that really helps bring us back at the end of every day, going to bed at night and making sure that the Word is the last thing that it is going through. And then we wrap up in prayer. And that is just a habit that we now can't give up. It's just so important to the two of us.
That's really cool.
Another thing that I think, though, that Andrik does too, is kind of going back to what Emilie-Rose was saying with doing something that you really enjoy doing, and incorporating while you're doing that, worshiping, praying. And Andrik likes to hike. So oftentimes for him, that's really life-giving. He, gets out and hikes and is in, God's creation. And I think that gives him a lot of life back as well.
Yeah, you'll often find me hiking down the trail with a speaker blasting worship music, and maybe even me belting out a few tunes, hoping that nobody's around. But if they are, well.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
I get that. Like, I really find a lot of worship music and podcasts even particularly like just good pastors. So I'll be like mountain biking, and like the fun part of mountain biking is going down the mountain, but most of your time you spend pedaling up. And so I'll just be like listening to a good podcast or some worship music, especially those days where like I am getting caught up in whatever project is kind of overwhelming me. And oftentimes like I start stressing out. I'm like, okay, even though I don't feel like I have time, I need to just step out of it, step into something that I enjoy for a little bit and be with God in it. That's cool. For sure. I was actually curious, Rochelle, if you had any thoughts on, just how to address like the anxiety tying in with your spiritual life and kind of getting stuck in bad spots, and how, if you have any answers for that, because that's a pretty common struggle.
Yeah. For me, what helped me through that was journaling a lot. And listening to worship music as well too. I think that's a big one, because worship music speaks a lot for me, especially. Like, it speaks to me, and it feels like God's speaking through that as well. But journaling is a big thing, because when I do journal, I kind of just write down what I'm feeling, and especially if there's like a big issue going on in my life, and there's more issues piling on top of that. When you just write it down, you kind of just see how, like, what's actually going on and like the main issue, and then like praying about it as well too, because then you find peace in that. So I think that's really important.
And think about dry seasons. Are there any particular things that you felt like you've learned out of dry seasons?
For me, I'd say putting my trust in God more, because like I had this huge issue with my friends, and like they were super close to me, and leaving them was so hard. But I kind of let God take control of that. And after that, the outcome was absolutely amazing, and I finally found joy and peace and love too. So
one thing that I've really become aware of, and this is probably more true when I am maybe in what I would consider somewhat of a dry season, is that there's many opportunities for us to get out or to go to an event, or and I've seen this throughout many years, that when your body or your flesh doesn't feel like it, that is most often when you actually should do what you're feeling like not doing. And so if you can really be disciplined to take the opposite action of what you feel like, the reward is that much greater. Some of the times when I said, I don't know if I really feel like going to that men's event, or I don't know if I feel like going to that worship night, or I don't know if I feel like going to life group this night. After I forced myself to go to those things, many a time I've come out and going, wow, that was amazing. I need to make sure that I don't say no to those in the future. And so I've really, that's really what helps me when my body or my flesh sort of says, no, I don't think I feel like or need to do it.
Well, I think that like really sometimes we forget there's a spiritual battle for our souls. And as much as like it can sound overly dramatic, I relate to that so much, where there's those times where you just don't feel it. Like sometimes, like even as a youth pastor, I don't feel like showing up to youth night. I'm dreading it for some reason. I'm like, I can go, I'm going to like kind of drag myself in there maybe. But so often when you do show up, when you are present, then you see God work so powerfully. And I really believe that oftentimes Satan sees what's coming, and he's like, God's going to do this amazing thing, so I'm going to do everything I can to hold you back from life group tonight, or from this event tonight, because I know what God wants to do in your life. And so rather than seeing it as just, I physically feel this way, I'm tired, or I'm in a bad mood, oftentimes it's like there may be more to this. This might actually be a bit of a battle.
I agree.
I agree.
Have to kind of label and let God step into and fight for you. Yeah. And one question, this is an interesting question. Do you think that dry seasons are always our fault, or do you think that sometimes God may lead us into what feels like a dry season?
I feel like they're not, like, I don't think God purposefully like puts us in a dry season, but I think that God could be challenging us and like kind of seeing like how we're going to handle it. And for me, I know that dry seasons are definitely when I experience the most growth as a person in my walk with God. It really is just like, I feel like it's because like you're thinking about it so much. Like you're like, why do I feel like this? Why, like, how can I fix this? All these questions are going through your head that it's like, you want to fix it. You want to better yourself. So I feel like for me, dry seasons really do encourage growth, but I feel like it's us that are drifting from God. It's not God drifting from us.
I think sometimes it is indicative of a change that needs to happen, or maybe a transition that needs to happen. And I think one of the things that I find myself doing during those times is asking as well, God, what do you want me to learn right now? What are you saying to me right now?
I feel like it's also like a choice too, because there's times where like I've been dealing with stuff and I was like, okay, I'll deal with it by myself, and then that kind of led to a dry season. So I was like, oh, that was my fault that I did it. But yeah, there's also times there was like God was definitely like testing my faith, and like it helps me grow in my faith as well. So I feel like it works. Yeah, it's like both ways. Like there's times where God tests us, and like there's other times where we walk into it, dry seasons or by ourselves. So
yeah, I really like those thoughts, because I almost think of like seasons, and when it comes to farming, there's seasons and they look very different, and like they can have a purpose, even though ones where it doesn't seem like much is happening, there's a purpose to them. And sometimes leaning into that and going, okay, in my spiritual life, there's times where I'm not going to feel God really present, really active. But if I'm still engaging with him, I can look forward to the fruit that's going to come, and I'm going to see down a few months later. But then there's also those times where you create your own seasons and you just run away.
Yeah.
And he can salvage things there, and he can work good in the evil that you're pursuing. As you turn back, he can go, okay, even though you had some pretty bad plans there, I can work good out of that, but it's a bit different. Yeah. That's cool. That's awesome. I really appreciate you guys sharing your different thoughts and experiences. It's been encouraging to me. I think that I've gained some insight and some perspectives myself on how to approach dry seasons in my own life and faith. And just as we wrap up, I want to know if you guys had any last thoughts that you didn't have a chance to share earlier. Yeah, I just open that up for you.
I was going to say like how, yeah, like Rochelle just said, how like it's kind of like a choice. And I feel like communication is such a big part of a dry season, because I feel like when there's little to none, obviously you're not talking to God and stuff, so you feel so like far. And I feel like it's the same thing like with a friend. Like if you're not calling your friend or you're not hanging out with your friend, like you guys are going to drift apart slowly. But if you guys keep that communication, keep in touch, you guys are going to have a relationship that's going to flourish, right?
Yeah, I think it's important just to humble yourself and be totally vulnerable with the Lord. He's not surprised, right? Like there's nothing we can do or say that's really going to shock him. Like just to be honest and say, I'm really struggling. I'm feeling really empty. I don't feel you. Whatever it is. I think that is so important, just to be totally honest and totally vulnerable with the Lord.
And it's a never-ending journey. You know, you're never going to get there. It's just always a work in progress. And so, no matter what age you're at or what stage in life, we're still all going to be going through these. And it's just trying to develop the skill set, the habits, and setting those boundaries that I mentioned earlier that will help you not get into those dry seasons, or you won't go into those dry seasons as often if you develop that skill set throughout your life.
I just wanted to mention this quote that my young life leader actually told me. It's helped me through a lot. I literally wrote it down because I love it so much. She said, expecting life to be happy all the time is not possible. Think of a desert where it is sunny all the time, but there is no life. Which is good, but there's, we need the rainy days to make the sun all the more better. and that just goes back to when I had my issues with school and stuff, and I was just constantly struggling, and I kept looking for that happiness, and then finally it rained, and it was so good. Yeah, so that was just a little quote that she told me, and I really liked it, so I wrote it down.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
No, it's been great spending time with all of you and hearing your thoughts, getting to know you a little bit too, because I'm kind of new to the church community, and this is a fun way to get to know all of you too. As I wrap up, I just want to thank the team of youth and young adults that actually helped write these episodes, that come up with the topics and the questions that we're addressing, and then it's just my job to ask those questions well, hopefully. They put a lot of hard work into that. And so, thank you, Lisa and Andrik, Rochelle, Emilie-Rose, for coming on. I'm just going to close up this episode in prayer. Lord, we thank you so much that you're a God who wants to be with us. This was stated earlier today, just that you are always there. And if there's a dry season, there's probably an element of us stepping away. It's not you stepping away from us ever. That you're so faithful and so present. That's amazing. Such a gift. And I pray as we've had this conversation, for those listening to this conversation, that if they're experiencing a dry season right now, that you would inspire creativity, that you inspire them and help them realize how they can reach out to you and be with you, experience your presence. If they need community, that the church would be there for them, that they'd have friends or family just come alongside them and encourage them in their faith, even if they're not feeling it at this moment. And I just pray over our church body as a whole, that we would come to be with you, God, even in this unique time with COVID, where it's so easy to be distracted and there's so little that pushes us to be with you, that we would find joy in being with you. We'd find rest in being with you, whether it's listening to worship music or listening to podcasts, going out and being in nature, serving others, whatever ways you've created us to connect with you, that we would just be known for that would be who we are as a church. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.